The lawyer's voice was calm, but his words detonated like a grenade in the conference room. Lila, he said, sliding a thick envelope across the polished oak table, your grandparents' estate leaves you as sole heir to $26 million. My mother's coffee cup froze midair. My uncle's fork clattered onto his plate, and my cousin, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, leaned forward with a sudden, hungry smile. That was the moment I knew my life was about to become a battlefield. Before all that, my world was quiet, predictable. I grew up in Marigold Falls, a small Oregon town where everyone knew who baked the best pies and which cashier at the grocery store would sneak you an extra coupon. My grandparents, Walter and Evelyn Langford, owned the biggest house on Willow Ridge, a sprawling ivy-covered estate that looked like something from a storybook. They weren't flashy people. Yes, they had money, old timber fortune, the kind you only read about, but they preferred community potlucks over galas, gardening gloves over diamond bracelets. I spent my summers in their garden, pulling weeds beside Grandma while Grandpa told bad jokes and handed me lemonade in cloudy mason jars. My parents, Carol and Dean, lived in a modest ranch-style home a few streets away. Dad worked as a high school history teacher. Mom ran a small boutique downtown. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. The Langfords' wealth was always there in the background, like the outline of mountains you stopped noticing after a while. I never thought it would touch me directly. My older brother, Jacob, was the golden child. He had the grades, the charm, the football trophies. Family gatherings always seemed to orbit around his latest achievement. I was the creative one, a nice way of saying I doodled too much in class and didn't have a 5-year plan. Still, I felt loved. Holidays at the Langford estate were my favorite. The whole family would gather, uncles, aunts, cousins spilling into the dining room, Grandma's cranberry sauce on every plate. Even Jacob and I got along then, teasing each other over board games after dinner. Sure, there were tiny cracks if you looked closely. My mom sometimes complained about how stingy her parents were, despite their fortune. My Uncle Ron liked to remind everyone that keeping wealth in the family was a Langford tradition. And once, when I was 14, I overheard my aunt whispering to my mother, "Walter needs to think about what's fair." But these were background murmurs, easy to ignore when life felt steady. I was 25, renting a small apartment above the bakery where I worked as a pastry chef, when my grandparents died. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday. They were returning from their annual anniversary trip to the coast when another driver lost control. The news hit like a S***ker punch. 2 people who'd been constants in my life, suddenly gone. The week after the funeral was a blur of casseroles, sympathy cards, and awkward silences. I assumed their estate would go to my mother and her siblings. I didn't even think about inheritances. It seemed crass, especially so soon. Which is why, when the lawyer called to arrange a family meeting at his office, I went in jeans and a cardigan, expecting to sit quietly while the adults discussed paperwork. I had no idea that everything, my family, my home, my sense of safety, was about to splinter. The reading of the will was supposed to be routine, at least, that's what I told myself while walking into Harper & Vale's law offices the following Friday. The reception smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. My mother sat stiffly in a navy pantsuit, eyes fixed on the door. My brother Jacob was scrolling through his phone, thumbs tapping rapidly. We were led into a conference room where my Uncle Ron and Aunt Linda were already seated. Ron gave me a curt nod. Linda avoided my eyes entirely. The lawyer, Mr. Pierce, was a thin man with silver hair and a habit of adjusting his glasses every few sentences. He began with the formalities, condolences, acknowledgement of the tragedy, the standard preamble. Then he opened a large envelope, pulled out several pages, and began to read. The first part was what I expected. Donations to charities my grandparents supported, bequests to old friends, a sum left to maintain the Langford Estate's gardens. And then, to our granddaughter, Lila Claire Langford, we leave the remainder of our estate, including all liquid assets, properties, and investments, valued at $26 million. The words seemed to hang in the air. I blinked, convinced I'd misheard. My mother's head whipped toward me. Jacob froze mid-scroll. My uncle's jaw actually dropped. Mr. Pierce continued reading as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of the table. My share wasn't conditional. There was no clause about splitting it among the family later. It was mine. When he finished, the silence was so thick you could hear the hum of the overhead light. "Is this a mistake?" my mother asked finally, her voice tight. "No," Mr. Pierce replied. "Your parents were very clear in their intentions. This document was signed and notarized 6 months ago." Ron leaned forward, his eyes sharp. 6 months ago? That's suspicious. Linda chimed in. What could possibly justify giving it all to her? She's, what, 25? still renting an apartment. Heat crept up my neck. I didn't ask for this, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. My mother's expression was unreadable, but there was a coolness in her gaze I'd never felt before. We'll talk about this later, she said, as if I'd done something wrong. After the meeting, Jacob caught up with me in the parking lot. You know they're going to fight this, right? He said. It's not fair, Lila. We're family. That money should be for all of us. I was still reeling. It's not like I'm going to blow it on myself. That's not the point, he cut in. You didn't earn it. The words stung, even though I knew they weren't entirely his own. Over the next few days, the shift in everyone's behavior was subtle but impossible to ignore. My mother called twice in one evening, something she hadn't done in years, but both times the conversation veered toward financial responsibility and family obligations. Linda showed up at the bakery where I worked, pretending to be interested in the pastries before casually asking if I'd considered donating part of the inheritance to help her pay off her mortgage. Ron sent me an email with a detailed investment proposal for a business he claimed would benefit the whole family. Even Jacob, who used to text me memes and football updates, started sending me links to urgent opportunities and smart ways to redistribute wealth. It was like they'd all read from the same playbook. Keep it friendly, keep it subtle, but make it clear that I was holding something they believed belonged to them. I tried to brush it off. Told myself they were just processing the shock. But deep down, I could feel the ground shifting. And it wasn't just them. Strangers started to act differently too. A man I'd gone on 2 dates with months ago suddenly messaged me on Instagram, saying he'd been thinking about me. An old high school acquaintance asked if I could help fund her nonprofit idea. The first warning bell wasn't one single moment, it was a chorus of small ones, ringing in unison. And each one said the same thing: the people around me weren't seeing me anymore. They were seeing $26 million. At first, I thought the awkwardness would fade, that once the shock wore off, we'd slip back into something like normal. I was wrong. By the second week after the will reading, the pressure was everywhere. It started with my mother. She stopped dropping by the bakery to say hello, and instead began inviting herself over to my apartment. She'd show up with store-bought cookies, sit on my couch, and casually steer the conversation toward my responsibilities, now that I had this kind of power. You know, Lila, she'd say, swirling tea in her mug, your father and I are still paying off the mortgage. With what you've been given, you could make life easier for everyone. That's what your grandparents would have wanted. When I hesitated, she sighed, that long, disappointed exhale that had haunted me since childhood. Jacob's tactics were less subtle. He started sending group texts to me, Mom, and a few cousins, laying out scenarios where family pooling resources could make us all wealthy. Each time, the implication was the same. I was the one holding everyone back. Aunt Linda escalated from hinting to outright pleading. One afternoon, she cornered me in the grocery store, clutching a bag of apples like it was a lifeline. My house is on the line, she whispered urgently. If you don't help, I could lose it. Do you really want that on your conscience? Uncle Ron, meanwhile, doubled down on his investment proposal, now including spreadsheets, projected profits, and thinly veiled threats about family relationships souring if I didn't get on board. It didn't stop there. I began noticing unfamiliar cars parked near my building. My phone rang with numbers I didn't recognize, sometimes hanging up when I answered, sometimes launching into pitches for charities or urgent causes that always required large donations. Even the bakery stopped feeling safe. One morning, a customer I'd never seen before lingered at the counter, leaning in with a too friendly smile. You're the Langford girl, right? The one who just came into all that money, he asked loudly enough for half the shop to hear. I mumbled something about mistaken identity, but my coworkers were already exchanging looks. By lunch, one of them, Carrie, asked if the rumors were true. It was exhausting, the way people's eyes seemed to flicker with calculation when they looked at me now. And then there was the mail. Letters started arriving at my apartment, some from strangers, some from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. One was from a second cousin in Florida, detailing his medical bills and ending with, I know you can help. Another came from someone claiming to be an old friend of my grandparents, offering exclusive opportunities if I could just send a small starter sum. I stopped answering my phone. I stopped opening the door unless I knew exactly who it was. But isolation wasn't just something I imposed, it was also imposed on me. A few close friends started to pull away. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but then Lena, my best friend since high school, canceled our plans for the 3rd time in a month. When I pressed, she admitted she didn't know how to act around me anymore. It's just, everything's different now, she said, not meeting my eyes. I don't want it to get weird. But it already had. The final straw came when I stopped by my parents' house one Sunday. I found Mom, Jacob, and Ron sitting in the living room, a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. They froze when I walked in, but not before I caught sight of the heading on one of the documents, Petition to Contest Will. Jacob cleared his throat. We were just exploring options, he said. I left without saying a word. On the drive home, I realized the truth. They weren't just pressuring me anymore. They were preparing for battle. And if I didn't find a way to protect myself soon, I'd be fighting it alone. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those gray, drizzly days when the whole town seemed to move in slow motion. I was closing up the bakery when my phone buzzed with a message from Lina. Turn on Channel 8. Now. I wiped my hands on my apron, switched on the small TV in the staff room, and there they were, my mother, Jacob, Uncle Ron, and Aunt Linda, sitting side by side in a local news studio. The cheerin at the bottom read, Langford family dispute over $26 million inheritance. The reporter, a woman with perfect hair and a sympathetic smile, leaned toward my mother. Carol, can you explain why you feel the will was unfair? Mom nodded gravely. My parents loved all of us. They valued fairness. But this was not fair. My daughter Lila is young, inexperienced, and being taken advantage of by people who don't have our family's best interests at heart. Ron jumped in. We believe the will was manipulated. There are irregularities in the documents. We just want what's right, to honor Walter and Evelyn's true wishes. I gripped the counter so hard my knuckles went white. They weren't just filing quietly anymore. They were taking this public, painting me as some naive puppet. Then Jacob spoke. This isn't about greed. It's about family. Lila knows we're stronger together. We just need her to do the right thing. The segment ended with a photo of me from my high school yearbook, smiling, unaware, 16 years old, as the reporter urged viewers to stay tuned for updates on this developing case. I shut off the TV and stood there in the silence, feeling the bakery's hum fade into the background. I'd been trying to keep things private, to protect what was left of our relationships. But they had just declared war in front of the entire town. That night, I called Jenna Lawson, the attorney I'd briefly met at the will reading. She agreed to meet the next morning. Sitting across from her in her office, I laid everything out, the pressure, the letters, the threats, and now the TV ambush. Jenna listened, then said, They're playing a public narrative game. They're betting that if they make you look selfish enough, you'll cave before it reaches court. We need to change the narrative, and fast. I hesitated. How? She leaned forward. You said your grandparents were deliberate people, yes? That they never did anything without a reason. I nodded. Then there's a reason they left it all to you. We need to find it, something solid, something that proves they intended this, beyond any question. Wills can be challenged on emotional grounds, but facts? Facts win. That night, I drove to the Langford estate, now standing dark and silent, the gardens overgrown since the funeral. Using the spare key my grandmother had given me years ago, I let myself in. The house smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I walked through the library, running my fingers along the spines of books I'd read as a child. That's when I noticed something odd. One shelf had a thin gap where a book should have been, but instead there was a metal lockbox pushed to the back. It wasn't locked. Inside, I found a folder labeled, Private, for Lila. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were letters, handwritten by my grandmother, dated over the last 3 years. In them, she explained how she and Grandpa had watched me work hard for everything I had, without ever asking for handouts. She wrote about the times I'd stayed late to help them in the garden, the birthday I'd organized for Grandpa when no one else remembered, the way I'd visited them weekly even during my busiest seasons. One line stopped me cold. Lila, you have a kindness and a sense of responsibility that others in this family do not. This money is not a reward. It is a trust. Use it wisely. The folder also contained a copy of the will, dated and notarized, along with a video file on a small USB stick labeled Our Decision. Back at my apartment, I plugged the USB into my laptop. The video opened to show my grandparents sitting together in their garden. My grandfather looked straight into the camera. If you're watching this, he said, we've passed. And if the family is making trouble, well, we expected that. We want to be clear, everything we've left is for Lila. She's earned it through her actions, not her bloodline. We love you all, but this is our choice. My grandmother nodded. No one pressured us. This is exactly what we want. By the time the video ended, I was crying. Not because of the money, but because I finally had proof, undeniable proof of their intent. And I knew exactly what to do with it. Jenna's face lit up when she saw the folder and USB on her desk. She watched the video twice, leaning forward, scribbling notes. "This," she said finally, "is a gift. It's ironclad. We'll use it strategically, not just dump it online. The goal isn't to humiliate them, it's to destroy their credibility in court and in public." I agreed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my grandparents' wishes, and myself. Our plan had 3 parts. First, Jenna would file a motion to include the letters, will copy, and video as exhibits in the probate case. This would make them official court records, accessible to any reporter willing to request them. Second, we'd leak just enough to shift the public narrative. A trusted journalist, someone Jenna had worked with, would get a short clip from the video and excerpts from the letters, accompanied by a statement from me: "I'm honoring my grandparents' explicit wishes. I will not be coerced into ignoring their decision." Third, we'd time the release for maximum impact, right before my family's next media stunt. That opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, my mother, Ron, and Linda announced they'd be hosting a community forum at the town hall to discuss fairness in family inheritances. It was obvious theater, a staged event to keep the pressure on me. We set our date. The night before the forum, Jenna called the journalist, who scheduled the piece for early the next morning. By breakfast, my phone was blowing up. The headline read, "Exclusive. Late Walter and Evelyn Langford's video will leave $26 million to granddaughter. This is our choice." The article embedded the 2-minute clip of my grandparents speaking directly into the camera, calmly explaining their decision. The letters were quoted, especially the part about trust and responsibility. By noon, the forum's online RSVP list had shrunk dramatically. People weren't as eager to attend a one-sided grievance session when they just heard the other side, from the deceased themselves. Still, I went. Jenna advised it would show I had nothing to hide. Walking into the town hall felt like walking into enemy territory. My mother stood at the podium, papers in hand, her expression taut. Ron and Linda sat to the side. Jacob was in the front row, arms crossed. The room was only half full, and I recognized several people giving me small nods of support. The journalist was there too, notebook in hand. Mom started her speech, talking about shared legacy and equitable distribution. But it was clear the energy had shifted. When she paused to take questions, someone in the back stood up. "Carol," the man said, "did you see the video your parents made? The one where they explain exactly why Lila gets everything." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mother blinked, thrown off. "I haven't had a chance to. They said it was their choice," the man pressed. "Seems to me that's the end of it." Ron jumped in, his voice sharp. "That video could be doctored." "We don't know. It's been entered into court records," I said, stepping forward. "And the original file has a verified creation date from my grandparents' own device. You're welcome to view it yourself." The tension in the room was electric. People shifted in their seats, some whispering to each other. Linda tried to regain control. "Regardless, we think." "No," I cut in. "You hope that if you keep shouting unfair, people will ignore the truth. But my grandparents made their wishes clear. This is harassment, and it stops today." The journalist was scribbling furiously. Cameras clicked. By the time the forum ended, it was obvious the tide had turned. A few attendees even came up to me to say they respected how I'd handled myself. But my family, they looked like they were ready to scorch the earth. And I knew they weren't finished yet. I thought the forum fiasco would be their breaking point, that after being cornered by evidence and public opinion, they'd finally back off. I underestimated them. 3 nights later, I came home from a late bakery shift to find my front door ajar. My heart lurched. I pushed it open slowly, my phone ready to dial 911. Sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee from one of my mugs, was Jacob. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded. He leaned back in the chair, unbothered. "Relax. I just wanted to talk without the lawyers." "By breaking into my apartment?" He shrugged. "Spare key under the mat. You really should change that." I stayed near the doorway. "Say what you came to say." He drummed his fingers on the table. "You can still make this right. Sign over half the money to Mom, Ron, and Linda, and this all goes away. No court. No more press." I almost laughed. "You think I'm going to give up what Grandma and Grandpa specifically entrusted to me? After everything you've pulled?" His jaw tightened. Lila, you don't get it. Mom's losing it. She says you've turned the whole town against her. Ron's business is tanking. Linda's selling jewelry just to make mortgage payments. You can fix this. They can fix it themselves, *T back. By living within their means. By not trying to steal from their own family. Jacob stood, his chair scraping the floor. For a second, I saw the brother I'd grown up with, the one who taught me how to throw a football in the yard, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You're going to regret this, he said. You think Jenna's going to protect you forever? Money disappears fast. Family doesn't come back. I opened the door wide. Get out. He left without another word. The next morning, Jenna called. Lila, they filed an emergency motion to freeze your accounts, claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the inheritance. It was a calculated strike, an attempt to paint me as unstable and get a court-appointed trustee to take control of the money. If it worked, I'd lose immediate access, maybe permanently. We had less than 48 hours before the hearing. That night, I barely slept. I went through every letter, every email from my grandparents, pulling out anything that showed my independence. My degree, my bakery job, the community events I'd organized. I also found texts from my mother over the past year, none of which hinted at any concern for my mental state until the inheritance came into play. Jenna worked through the night compiling our response. She also subpoenaed footage from the town hall forum and recent interviews, where my family openly admitted their issue wasn't my well-being, it was fairness and sharing. At the hearing, my family sat together in the front row, whispering furiously. My mother avoided my gaze. Ron smirked. Linda clutched a tissue she didn't use. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes, listened as their lawyer painted me as a young woman overwhelmed by sudden wealth and vulnerable to predatory influences. When it was our turn, Jenna stood and calmly dismantled their claims. She presented the video will, the letters, my work history, and even testimony from my bakery's owner about my reliability and financial responsibility. Then she played a clip from the forum, Ron saying, if she'd just share it, we wouldn't be here. The judge's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. An hour later, she delivered her ruling, motion denied. Not only would my accounts remain accessible, but any further frivolous petitions could result in sanctions against the plaintiffs, my own family. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Jenna shielded me as we got to her car, but not before I caught sight of my mother standing on the steps, staring at me with something between anger and disbelief. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a legal win. It was the final severing of whatever fragile thread had still connected us. The weeks after the final hearing felt strangely quiet. No more urgent calls from Jenna, no surprise visits, no anonymous letters stuffed into my mailbox. The silence was almost unsettling at first, like waiting for a storm that never came. Then I realized, the storm had passed. My family didn't appeal. They didn't send messages, not even to hurl insults. It was as if I'd been erased from the group text of my own bloodline, and in a way I had. The bakery became my refuge again. Customers still gave me curious glances, but most of the buzz had faded. A few regulars even congratulated me quietly, saying they admired how I'd handled myself. Jenna helped me set up a trust to manage the inheritance responsibly. I kept my modest apartment for now, resisting the urge to make any big, flashy moves. The first thing I did was pay off my student loans and help renovate the bakery's kitchen, not because anyone asked, but because it felt good to invest in something that gave me purpose. I didn't hear from Jacob for months. Then, one afternoon, a plain white envelope showed up in my mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words in his handwriting, I miss us, Lila. No return address, no apology, no request for money. I didn't know what to do with it, so I slipped it into the same folder where I kept my grandparents' letters. My mother's silence was louder. She sold the house and moved to a smaller place out of town. A mutual acquaintance told me she referred to me as estranged if anyone asked. Ron's business went under. Linda did lose her house eventually. I wish I could say I didn't care, that the betrayal had burned away any lingering ties, but that would be a lie. Some nights, I'd lie awake remembering birthdays and summer picnics, wondering how we'd gotten from there to here. But then I'd hear my grandmother's voice in that video. This money is not a reward, it is a trust. Use it wisely. So I did. I set aside a portion of the inheritance to start a scholarship fund for local kids pursuing careers in culinary arts, a nod to both my passion and my grandparents' love for community. I donated quietly to the library they used to take me to, ensuring their names were engraved on a plaque by the front desk. I also allowed myself one indulgence, buying a small house on the edge of town. Not a mansion, not a trophy property, just a cozy craftsman with a garden big enough for lilacs and a bench under the maple tree. The kind of place my grandparents would have visited with a basket of fresh bread. On the first warm evening of spring, I sat on that bench with a cup of tea, watching the sun set behind the hills. For the first time since the lawyer read their will, I felt a kind of peace that wasn't just the absence of conflict, it was the presence of something steady, something mine. I still get whispers from people who think I should have split the money, that I'm selfish for keeping it all. But the truth is, the money was never the point. The point was to honor the trust my grandparents placed in me, to prove that their faith wasn't misplaced. Losing my family was the price. It's a price I'll carry for the rest of my life. But I've built something out of the wreckage, a life that's not defined by what I inherited, but by what I choose to do with it. And when I walk through my garden, feeling the earth under my hands, I like to think my grandparents are somewhere smiling, knowing their choice gave me not just security, but freedom. Because in the end, the 26 million didn't make me rich. It made me unshakable.